Hey plant lovers, welcome back. For years, I was making mistakes with Monstera that I didn't even know were mistakes. And I'm willing to bet you're making at least two of them right now. Here's the situation most people describe. They did their research, they moved their Monstera to a bright corner. They water it when the top inch of soil is dry. They're not overwatering, they're not underwatering. They repotted it when they brought it home, gave it fresh soil, even bought a little stake to support the stem. And still, the leaves are small. Solid green hearts, no splits, no holes, no drama. Just a very ordinary-looking plant sitting in a corner looking politely bored. So they assume the plant needs more time, or more fertilizer, or a bigger pot. And none of those things fix it. The problem isn't that Monstera is hard to grow. The problem is that almost everything we instinctively do to care for a plant is the exact opposite of what Monstera actually wants. Because Monstera is not a normal houseplant. It is a canopy-climbing rainforest vine from the tropical forests of southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Panama. And it has been shaped by millions of years of a very specific set of pressures that have almost nothing to do with a well-lit living room corner. Once you understand why, once you stop treating it like a generic foliage plant and start treating it like what it actually is, everything changes. Hit subscribe if you want real, practical plant knowledge every week. Not generic tips, but the actual science behind why plants do what they do. The first revelation is the one that stops most people cold, and it's about light, but not in the way you think. Everyone knows Monstera needs bright, indirect light. You've read it 100 times. Bright, indirect. And so you put your plant in a bright room, a few feet from a window, where it gets no direct sun, just ambient brightness. This feels correct. It feels responsible. You're following the rules. Here's what nobody tells you. Light doesn't just diminish as you move away from a window. It collapses. The relationship between distance and light intensity follows what's called the inverse square law, which sounds intimidating but means something simple. Move your plant from 1 foot away from a window to 3 feet away, and you don't lose a third of the light. You lose more than 75% of it. The brightness of a room that looks perfectly adequate to your eyes can be functionally dark to a plant. Monstera deliciosa, in its native understory habitat in the forests of southern Mexico and Guatemala, receives what researchers call dappled canopy light. Not deep shade, but filtered bright light that shifts through the day as sunlight passes through the forest ceiling overhead. When botanists measure this, they find light levels that are far higher than what most people assume indirect light means indoors. The University of Florida's IFAS extension program, which has documented Monstera's naturalized behavior in Florida's subtropical environments, consistently notes that low light doesn't just slow the plant's growth. It specifically suppresses fenestration, the technical term for the splits and holes that make this plant extraordinary. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth understanding. Fenestration is not a decorative choice by the plant. In the wild, as Monstera climbs higher into the forest canopy, the upper leaves begin developing splits and holes so that lower leaves aren't blocked from reaching sunlight. The perforations are a light-sharing adaptation. They are the plant's response to strong, consistent, reliable light. A structural signal that the plant has reached a position where it's receiving enough energy to invest in that complex leaf architecture. When light is insufficient, the plant simply never builds that architecture. It produces plain, solid leaves because it doesn't have the photosynthetic energy budget to do anything more sophisticated. So what does this mean practically? If your Monstera is producing solid leaves, the single most likely explanation before nutrients, before pot size, before anything else, is that it is not receiving enough light. Not that the room looks dark, it probably doesn't, but an east-facing window with unobstructed morning sun, or a south-facing window with your plant positioned within 2 to 4 feet of the glass, is what this plant needs to consistently produce its famous leaf architecture. If you're in a northern-facing apartment, a grow light running at least 12 hours per day will close that gap. What you don't want is a plant positioned so far from a window that the light intensity has already collapsed to a fraction of what seems adequate. Move your plant closer to its light source. Not directly into the hot afternoon sun through a south-facing window in July. That will scorch the leaves. But genuinely close. That single change will do more for your Monstera than almost anything else on this list. And if you want a practical way to test whether your plant is getting enough light before you commit to moving furniture, try the shadow test. Hold your hand flat between a light source and a white wall or piece of paper. If the shadow your hand casts is soft and blurry with no clear edges, the light level is too low for Monstera to thrive. A sharp, clear-edged shadow means the light has the directional intensity this plant needs. It takes 30 seconds, costs nothing, and tells you more than any general room brightness estimate. One more thing on light that almost nobody mentions. The direction of the light matters as much as the intensity. East-facing windows give you gentle morning sun, soft and cool. The spectrum Monstera finds easiest to absorb without stress. South-facing windows give you the highest total light hours of any orientation in the continental United States, which makes them excellent for this plant with a sheer curtain to soften the midday intensity. West-facing windows give you afternoon sun, which runs hotter and can cause heat stress on the leaves even when the light intensity itself is adequate. North-facing windows, in most of the country, simply will not provide enough light for Monstera to produce fenestrated leaves. And a grow light is not a compromise in that situation. It is the correct tool. A full-spectrum LED grow light, set to run 12 hours per day, will outperform a north-facing window in most American homes. That is just the physics of the situation. The second revelation was the one that completely changed how I understood this plant. And it has to do with those thick, brown, slightly alien-looking tendrils growing out of the stem. The aerial roots. Most people's instinct when they see aerial roots is to cut them off. They look messy, they dangle, they seem purposeless. And a lot of care guides will tell you they're optional, cosmetic, something to manage. That is wrong in a way that matters deeply for this plant. Monstera deliciosa is a hemiepiphyte, a technical term that describes something fascinating about how it survives. Unlike houseplants that simply grow in soil, Monstera begins its life on the forest floor and then spends its entire adult life climbing. It germinates in the darkness of the understory, actually grows toward shadows rather than toward light in its juvenile phase, a behavior botanists call negative phototropism, because the darkest patch in a rainforest floor is almost always the base of a large tree. The tree is what the plant is navigating toward. Once it finds that tree, it uses its aerial roots to attach, anchor, and climb. Here is what this means for leaf shape. Monstera does not randomly produce its mature, fenestrated leaves at any stage of its life. It produces them specifically as a climbing plant, once it is elevated and attached to a vertical support. Research has measured this directly. Studies tracking Monstera grown with and without moss poles found that plants with a moss pole began producing fenestrated leaves dramatically faster, and at larger sizes, than plants growing unsupported. The act of climbing is not incidental. It is the biological trigger that shifts the plant from juvenile leaf form to adult leaf form. So the stake you put in the pot when you brought it home, the thin wooden dowel or the plastic spike, is not enough. What this plant needs is a thick moss pole, at least 4 feet tall, with live or hydrated sphagnum moss around the exterior. The reason the moss matters is that Monstera's aerial roots are not just anchors. They are nutrient and moisture absorbers. They evolved to attach to moss-covered bark on tree trunks in humid rainforests. And in your home, they will do exactly the same thing if given the opportunity. When an aerial root finds the moist surface of a sphagnum moss pole, it grips and thickens. The plant registers this as elevation, and the leaves it produces next begin to shift toward the split, perforated, fully fenestrated form. So don't cut the aerial roots. Train them. Press them gently against the moss pole surface and give them time to attach. If an aerial root has grown long enough to reach the soil, let it reach the soil. It will convert to a normal subterranean root and start pulling nutrients up from the ground. Researchers who have studied this conversion found that Monstera aerial roots that make soil contact undergo structural changes on a cellular level, shifting from air root architecture to root soil architecture. Essentially, the plant repurposes the same structure for a completely different function. That one root, contributing to the plant's nutrient and water uptake, will show up in the next leaf it produces. And if the aerial roots feel unmanageable, too long, growing in awkward directions, you have options beyond cutting. Coil them gently along the inside rim of the pot and direct them toward the soil. They will find their way down. Or press them back against the moss pole and secure them loosely with a biodegradable tie until they grip on their own. What you do not want to do is repeatedly remove them, because each aerial root represents an investment of the plant's energy it used to build a structure that helps it climb, anchor, and feed itself. Cutting them repeatedly sends the plant into a loop of rebuilding without ever reaching the climbing stability that triggers mature leaf development. Here's the one that changed everything for me, and it's the one nobody explains correctly when they talk about root rot. Most people think Monstera dies from too much water. And while overwatering is a real problem, the actual mechanism is something different. And understanding the difference is what allows you to actually fix it. Monstera's roots need oxygen. Not occasionally, not as a bonus. They require a continuous supply of oxygen to carry out the cellular respiration that keeps them alive. In Monstera's native habitat in Central America, its roots cling to the bark of trees and move through the loose, air-rich organic matter of the forest floor. They have never evolved for dense, compacted, waterlogged soil. What kills a Monstera root is not the water itself. It's that water, sitting in heavy, poorly aerated soil, pushes the oxygen out of the root zone. The roots essentially suffocate. And once the roots die, pathogens that cause rot move in, which is why we call it root rot, even though the rot is the consequence, not the cause. This distinction matters because it changes what you do. If the problem were simply too much water, the solution would be to water less. But if the problem is oxygen deprivation, the solution is soil composition. Specifically, a mix that holds enough moisture for the roots while maintaining the air pockets that allow oxygen circulation. And this is something you can control at every repotting. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's guidelines for tropical aeroids, the plant family Monstera belongs to, recommend a mix that incorporates structural amendments, creating sustained air pockets. The standard approach that works consistently is 3 parts quality potting soil, combined with 1 part perlite and 1 part coarse orchid bark. The perlite creates drainage channels that water passes through quickly. The orchid bark mimics the chunky, airy texture of decomposing forest debris. The material Monstera's roots actually evolved to grow through. Together, they keep the root zone from compacting and hold the oxygen circulation the roots depend on. Choose a pot with proper drainage holes, not a decorative cache pot without drainage that you set the nursery pot inside of, but an actual growing pot that drains freely. And here is something counterintuitive. Monstera does not object to being fairly pot-bound. Because it evolved climbing trees rather than spreading roots through open soil, it has a higher tolerance for tight root conditions than most common houseplants. You do not need to rush to repot it when you bring it home. Give it time to settle. Repot when you see roots growing out of the drainage holes or circling visibly at the soil surface, not before. If these revelations are already shifting how you see your Monstera, hit that like button right now. That one gesture tells the platform this content matters, and it's what allows me to keep going deep on topics like this instead of recycling the same generic care tips you've already read a dozen times. This next one is the reason most people never get the Monstera they were imagining when they bought it, and it comes down to a mistake that happens before they even get the plant home. There are 2 Monstera plants commonly sold in the United States that look nearly identical in a nursery. One is Monstera Deliciosa, the true Swiss cheese plant, the one that produces the enormous, spectacular, deeply fenestrated leaves that appear in every design photograph and plant influencer feed. The other is Monstera borsigiana, which is sold everywhere from Home Depot to Trader Joe's and is frequently labeled as Monstera Deliciosa because, as juveniles, they are nearly impossible to distinguish by sight. The difference becomes clear with time. Monstera Deliciosa is the large form plant. Under good conditions, its mature leaves can reach 2 to 3 feet across. Its petioles, the stems connecting each leaf to the main stalk, are long. At the base of each petiole, Monstera Deliciosa develops a distinctive ruffled, rippling edge called geniculum movement. Borsigiana is a more compact variety. Its leaves typically max out at 12 to 18 inches. Its petioles are shorter. The ruffling at the petiole base is absent or minimal. If you have owned your Monstera for 2 or more years, are giving it consistently good light, have a moss pole, and are still producing leaves that feel underwhelming in size, there is a real possibility that what you own is borsigiana rather than deliciosa. This is not a failure on your part. It is a widespread nursery labeling issue. Borsigiana is beautiful, grows faster, and does well in more limited spaces. But it will not produce the oversized, theatrical leaf architecture of true deliciosa, regardless of how well you care for it. The ceiling on its leaf size is lower, and knowing that matters for setting expectations. If you want true Monstera deliciosa, the large leaf form, the most reliable place to find correctly labeled plants is through reputable specialty sellers on Etsy or eBay, where growers identify and photograph individual plants, or through plant swap communities on Reddit's r/rare houseplants, where knowledgeable collectors can help you identify what you're looking at. Buying at a big box retailer is not a guarantee you're getting deliciosa, even when the tag says so. The fifth revelation is about pruning, and this one catches almost everyone off guard, because the instinct to prune makes total sense if you've ever worked with a vining plant. If you've grown pothos, philodendron, or tradescantia, you know that cutting a vine back is one of the kindest things you can do for it. Cut a stem, and 2 new growth points emerge. The plant becomes bushier, fuller, more energetic. It's a reliable hack that works for nearly every vining houseplant you're likely to own. It does not work the same way with Monstera, and here is why. Monstera's leaf development is not random. Each leaf on a Monstera stem represents the plant at a particular stage of maturity. As the plant climbs and ages, each new leaf it produces is intended to be more developed than the last, more fenestrated, larger, more architecturally complex. This developmental progression is encoded in the plant's biology and moves in one direction, forward. When you cut a stem back, the new growth that emerges from the cut node does not continue from where the plant left off. It reverts. The first leaves that emerge from a pruned node are juvenile leaves, small, solid, heart-shaped, unfenestrated. The plant has to essentially climb back up through its developmental stages before it begins producing mature leaf architecture again. If you keep cutting, you keep resetting. This doesn't mean pruning is always wrong. If a stem has disease, pest damage, or structural issues, removing it is the right call. But pruning for the sake of bushiness, the reflex that works everywhere else, works against Monstera specifically. The plant that looks impressive is the one that has been allowed to climb, develop, and age forward. The goal is elevation, not volume. Let it grow up. Let the new leaves emerge from a climbing position. That is when you will see what this plant is actually capable of. And the final factor, the one nobody wants to hear, is patience. Not in a vague philosophical sense, in a specific, measurable, biological sense. Monstera deliciosa is a plant that is genuinely designed around a long timeline. In its native rainforest in southern Mexico and Panama, it does not reach its mature, fenestrated, spectacular form in months. It reaches that form over years of climbing, of stabilizing, of building root systems that support its upward trajectory. The leaf architecture you see in photographs, The enormous split leaves, the deeply perforated surfaces, the dramatic sculptural quality. That represents a plant that has been given time, height, consistent light, and a structure to climb. In a home environment, under genuinely good conditions, the right light, a proper moss pole, well-aerated soil, and no unnecessary pruning, you can expect your first truly fenestrated leaves to appear within several months of meeting the right conditions, assuming the plant has reached basic maturity. Juvenile plants, meaning plants under roughly 2 years old that have never climbed, will still produce solid leaves even in perfect conditions, because fenestration is developmentally gated, not just environmentally triggered. The plant has to reach a certain biological maturity before the fenestration program activates at all. Full, large-form fenestration on leaves above 12 to 15 inches wide generally takes 2 to 3 years of properly supported growth. Not years of waiting with no progress. Years of visible, incremental, measurable advancement. Each new leaf a little larger, a little more elaborate, a little closer to what this plant is capable of. Think of it the way you'd think about a fruit tree. A young apple tree doesn't produce fruit in its first season, or its second. You plant it, you tend it, you build the conditions for what's coming, and then one spring it happens. Not because you forced it, but because you built the right foundation over time. Monstera works the same way. The fenestrated leaves are not a reward for patience. They are the natural result of conditions being genuinely right, sustained across a long enough window for the plant to express what it's biologically capable of. Your job is not to wait. Your job is to build those conditions and then step back. The Monstera rewards people who understand what they are working with. It is not a fast plant. It is not a forgiving plant if given the wrong conditions for years and then expected to recover overnight. But it is a deeply rewarding one when the fundamentals are right. Watch the new leaves unfurl. Each one is a result of everything you've given the plant over the months before it. That is not something you can rush. And when the leaf finally opens to show you something genuinely spectacular, something with real splits, real perforations, real scale, you will understand exactly why the wait was worth it. Here's the one principle that connects all 6 of these revelations. Monstera is not a houseplant that tolerates good conditions. It is a rainforest climber that reveals its true nature only when given them. Since I understood this, my Monstera has never looked better. Tell me in the comments, what's been your biggest struggle with Monstera? I want to hear it. Take care of your plants.